Hello, everybody. Hello, and welcome to How to Get Hired. I am Bill, the company's expert. Thank you for joining me today. This is the weekly live stream where we do a live Q&A on everything related to getting hired. Job search, job interviews, resumes, applications, networking, careers, discovery of jobs, promotions, all of that stuff all together. This is, as I said, a live Q&A. So that means that if you're seeing my face, you should see somewhere in the vicinity of my face, you should see a live chat box or chat field of some kind. Get in there. If you are a subscriber to my channel, you should be able to get in there, ask me any question you want, what you're struggling with, what you're wondering about, and I will do my best to help you out. That's the whole point of this. The title of today's episode is Awkward Question. Why did you leave your last job? How to answer. So we're going to talk about that to kick things off. This is episode 116 of How to Get Hired. We've done 116 of these, if I'm not mistaken, if I haven't lost count somewhere along the way. And as always, a public service announcement, special thanks to my YouTube channel members, my Patreons, my super thanks donors, and of course to you. You're here and you're doing some self-improvement. If you weren't here, I wouldn't be here. So thank you very much. Okay. Amazed is here. Amazed says, greetings, we are back. Yes. Thank you for joining me today. I see there's 17 people here. So, you know what? Let's just get right down to it. We're going to kick things off with answering everybody's favorite question. You go to a job interview and they ask you a string of questions. A lot of them are completely lame and unintuitive. And this is one of the standard job interview questions that you may encounter. And everybody loves it. They ask you this to make you squirm because it's a negativity question. That means they're asking you about something that's bad. So you answer by saying something bad. That's what they're hoping for. And this can be very conflicting because are you at the job interview to talk about bad things? Of course not. Of course not. But you feel that you must do it to appease them in some way. And so especially a lot of new job seekers are conflicted by questions like this. They don't know what to do here. Let's get into it. Okay, so first of all, I have to do this almost every time. I have to explain that this question can be phrased a variety of ways. So they may not use the exact words. How was I phrasing it? Why did you leave your last job? They may phrase it a different way. They may say, have you ever quit a job? Something like that. It's the same question where you're being asked to talk about the same thing, but they're using different words to phrase it, right? So anytime they ask you about your previous job, what was your previous job? Why did you leave? Anything to do with leaving a job, all that kind of stuff. It's the same question, okay? So I just want to say that. Now, why do they ask this question? They ask it for a couple of different reasons, right? A lot of people out there who are like me, you might be technical people, technically minded, you might be introverted, you pay more attention to the literal question you're being asked as opposed to context clues to inform you what they might really be asking. Because as we all know, there's usually a question behind a question. Okay, that's certainly the case in job interviews. And this is no exception. First thing they're wondering about is why did you leave your last job? That's the obvious thing. But beyond that, they're asking this question for other reasons. And sometimes these are the more important reasons. One is to determine if you're going to badmouth somebody. Okay. They've just met you, you're making your first impression, and they're wondering if they ask you about something, like a bad boss or an unpleasant experience. Let's say you left a job because it was unpleasant. Are you the type of person that's going to badmouth those people? Because if you are, then the presumption is that if you can badmouth them, you will badmouth these people here if they were to hire you. Okay, if there's something about them that you don't like, you won't be ashamed to say it to anyone who wants to know. So it's kind of like a test where they bait you just to see if you're going to take the bait, right? And if you do, and if you're forthcoming and you give them exactly what they asked for, you lose. See, what a wonderful game. Okay, the other problem that this question has, like I mentioned, is it's a negativity question. They ask you about something that's bad. And in order to appease them and answer the question, you have to start talking about bad things, right? So they could say, for example, what's the worst thing about you? Like that would be a negativity question. In order to give them what they want, you would have to then talk about how you're bad at stuff, right? Now, there's a conflict. Are you at the job interview to talk about how bad you are at stuff? Of course not, right? What kind of first impression are you leaving if you were to answer that question fully and completely? Well, you'd be shooting yourself in the foot, right? And that's also what's going on here. Usually when you leave something, it's not a good reason. Either you quit, which might be bad. It might suggest that you're someone who quits, or you were let go, which, is also not a good thing. It could suggest that you're not a good employee, right? Or you were terminated, which is even worse, right? What kind of person are you if the last job you had, you were fired from, right? What kind of first impression does that make? So this is what they're asking you about. And it's not as simple as just answering it plainly, honestly, giving them full and complete information, because you succeed in eliminating yourself. That's the problem here. Okay. So a couple of things here. If you're new to this, remember, in a job interview, never say anything bad about anyone. Okay? Don't talk bad about a previous job. Don't talk bad about a previous boss or coworkers, and don't say anything bad about yourself. Okay? You follow that and you should do well. Okay? Now, always remember also that in a job interview, we always tell the truth. Okay? We shouldn't be engaging in outright lies. Okay? And I'm deadly serious when I say usually those don't work. They don't work out in the end. Now, because we don't tell lies, that doesn't automatically mean that we disclose everything. Okay? So remember that. We always tell the truth, but we don't always have to disclose everything. The job interview is not a deposition. You're not in a court of law. You're not under oath. Okay? They can ask anything they want. Does that mean that you must answer any question they ask you? No, it doesn't. There are quite a few things that are just none of their damn business, but they will ask you anyway. And any interaction between you and a third party that doesn't involve them falls under the category of none of their damn business. So they are not entitled to know that information. Now, you can disclose it if you wish. If somebody asks you your credit card number, you can disclose that if you decide that's what you want to do. Nothing wrong with that. You can if you want, but there's no obligation that if somebody asks you for your credit card number, you have to tell them, right? I just want everyone to be clear, because there's a lot of first-time job seekers, a lot of young people that are getting taken advantage of in this situation. You go down to the job interview and, you're in the mode of wanting to be forthcoming. You want them to think favorably about you. So you figure, okay, well, I'm here to answer questions. So any questions you have, I'll try and answer them to the best of my ability, right? But then that is abused, and they ask you about things that are crossing the line into personal information, confidential information, and that includes information that makes you look bad. It gives a negative first impression of you if you disclose it. Okay? It just looks bad. It's not really bad, but it appears bad when they don't know you and they're just getting to know you. Right? This question is the king of that. Okay? So just be aware of that. They may ask about certain things, but it may look bad if you were to answer that fully, completely, honestly. Number two, they're not actually entitled to that information, and a lot of people would consider that an overreach. They're asking you about personal things, confidential things that normally you wouldn't reasonably disclose that, like a credit card number, right? Okay, so be aware of that. And this question also includes that stuff too. Okay. Now, the other thing is, are you going down to this job interview to talk about your last job at length? Is that what you're here for? Absolutely not. that would be a distraction. It would take away valuable talk time that you could have been using to sell yourself, to say, look, this is how great I am. This is what I can do for you. Here's what I know. Here's what I have done. Here are my skills, right? Instead of talking about that stuff, you end up giving them all kinds of details about the last job you worked at that have nothing to do with this job, that don't even frame you in a positive light. Is that what you're there to do? Absolutely not. So it's very easy to get distracted by questions like this, have it take up all your talk time, and then there's no time left to actually sell yourself and make a good impression about why you would be the person they should pick, right? So these are all things going on in this question. That's why we have to answer this question diplomatically. We have to rehearse our answer. And when we go down to the job interview, it should be like muscle memory. You give your answer that you've worked out ahead of time and you've rehearsed. So it should be, very easy to say when they ask you this question. Let's get into how you actually answer it now, okay? Okay, now, you could have left your last job for several reasons, right? One obvious reason is that you were laid off, okay? You weren't fired for cause. That means you didn't have a performance issue or anything like that. You were just laid off. The company was downsizing. They had to cut staff. It was almost random what jobs they eliminated. And you just unfortunately drew the short straw. You might have been laid off with a bunch of your peers all at the same time through no fault of your own, okay? If that was the situation, here's how you handle it. First of all, it's okay to say that you were laid off. There's absolutely no issue with that. And it doesn't frame you in a bad light to say I was laid off. If you were laid off as a part of a group, mention that, because that further gives evidence that there was nothing wrong with you. You were just a victim of circumstances. You could be an amazing employee, but this happened to you anyway. So it's okay to say that the company was downsizing, that your term expired, things like this. Okay. And say, I was laid off. That's the deal. And if you want to emphasize that it wasn't for cause, it was simply, cutbacks or some reason like that, that should be fine. And that's a good, understandable reason. So if that's your situation, you can just say that, no problem. On the other hand, if you decided to leave your last job voluntarily, okay, the company didn't lay you off and you weren't fired, they didn't kick you out, you decided independently, I'm going to leave. I'm going to give my notice and leave, okay? Once again, under most circumstances, that's fine to admit, okay? Now, with this situation, you will most likely be required to give a little bit of an explanation, because although it's okay to admit this, the danger is that they could get an impression of you as the type of employee that quits, like a job hopper. You only stay for a short amount of time. Something isn't perfectly to your liking, so you say, no, I'm out, that's it, I quit, right? I have a very thin skin. I can't tolerate any kind of inconvenience. The moment the job starts becoming not super fun for me, I leave, right? You don't want to give that impression. So it's good to give a little bit of an explanation for the circumstances that led to you deciding to leave, okay? So a good sort of blanket thing, if you really don't want to get into it, but is usually true to some degree for almost everybody, is you can say, well, there were no opportunities for growth at that organization. I took the job and it was great and I have no complaints about the people or the company. But there were no opportunities to move forward at that organization. And I'm ready to do more. That's the magic words. Those are the magic words. I'm ready to do more. Why are you here? I'm here because I'm ready to do more. No issues in my last job, was perfectly fine, but I'm ready to do more. And employers love that. Okay, they like people that they want to move forward, they want to learn, they want to grow. Those are all very good qualities. Okay, so if you left your last job, it's okay to admit that. Give a very brief explanation. And if you don't really want to get into the soap opera of why you left, you want to keep it to 10 seconds or less. Those are some good phrases. No opportunities for growth, and I was ready to do more. And that's what brings me here. Okay? Now we move on to the awkward part. Okay, if you were fired, right, you were terminated with cause. That means that in their eyes anyway, there was something wrong with you. Now, there's a lot of stuff to unpack here. I mean, you could have been working for a bunch of insane morons, right? And you were a tremendously amazing employee, but for whatever reason, they had a problem with you, right? It's a judgment call, right? Maybe you were terrible, or maybe you were awesome, but they were out to lunch, right? But either way, you were fired, okay? You were terminated with cause. What do you say if you're coming from that situation, okay? Now, I'm going to give you two answers here. I'm going to give you the answer that most recruiters will give you, and I'm going to give you my own recommendation. The answer that most recruiters will give you, which I feel is very self-serving and that you shouldn't do, is to say, is basically to admit that you were fired. You say, I was fired, okay? You explain what the issue was, why you were fired, and you explain what you learned from that experience, and then you explain how you've been working on it, okay? So that's an answer that you will hear that's been put out into the ether quite a lot, okay? Recruiters love this because it's less work for them. Instead of them having to dig and peel back the layers and find, who you are and what are your faults, they take the lazy way. They just ask you, so what are your faults? And you say, oh, well, let me tell you about it. I'm terrible. I was fired from my last job. Oh, yeah. I was drinking on the job and I was lazy and, I beat up my boss. Yeah, I know, huh? Yeah, it's kind of living the dream. But I'm working on it and I'm better now and I'm ready to come here and have everything be rosy. They would love to be able to do that, to just get you to admit all your faults, air your dirty laundry, just unashamedly, unabashedly. They would love that. And so that's the answer you often hear recommended from recruiters, from interviewers. Not to mention the fact that this totally contradicts a lot of principles of how to do a job interview, right? It also totally contradicts a lot of the principles that recruiters are taught in recruitment theory, including the foundational principles of behavioral questions. They love to ask behavioral questions in job interviews. These are the questions where they say, tell me about a time, you did this, right? And you tell a story. Now, why do they ask those questions? It's based on the principle that past behavior predicts future behavior. They don't care about the past. They don't care what you did with some other company. They care about what you're going to do here if they were to hire you, right? So if you did this thing in the past, then it's highly likely that if you were put in that situation again, you would behave the same way, right? Right. So here you have the complete flip of that. Why did you leave your last job? Oh, I was fired. Okay. Well, if past behavior does indeed predict future behavior, then what we're getting from this is that you're the type of person that doesn't tend to work out and you end up having to be fired. So does that make you look like a good employee that we should engage? Absolutely not, right? According to their own principle, it doesn't hold up. This would be a terrible thing for you to say. Okay, so you want to try and avoid saying you were fired at all costs. Okay? Now there's some things you can do. Okay, to that end. And now we come to the answer that I do recommend, okay? Because if you were to follow that advice, this answer becomes like a sudden death elimination question, almost like the salary question. How much money do you need? You give it an open-ended question, you give a number, and then you're eliminated because unbeknownst to you, you set a number that was over their little hurdle number, right? That they didn't tell you about, right? So you've just eliminated yourself. This question is exactly the same thing. If you were fired, you say, oh, I was fired. A lot of people will eliminate you outright, right? For the same reason. Okay, so here's what I say. Here's my recommended answer after all this song and dance. Okay, first of all, this is not a deposition. You're not put on the stand. You don't have to disclose what you did at some other job if you don't want to. Okay, how can we do this in an innocuous way? Well, first of all, I'd say don't say you were fired. That's a basic principle here. Speak instead about the problem that might have led to your firing. You could just say, well, I had a difference of opinion with my boss about several things, something like that. And so I decided to leave. You could do it like that. I would not have an issue with you saying something like that. Now, what's even more elegant that I would explain, and there's one good answer that if you can say this would be a good answer, and that is, you could say that the role kind of changed while you were there, and I signed on for a particular job, and over time that job morphed into a completely different job, so my duties completely changed, and this new job that it ended up being, it did not play to my strengths or to my interest. So it didn't work out. The new job didn't really work out for me. It didn't work for me. But that's why I'm here, because that job ended up reiterating or reinforcing my interest and my strengths in being able to do the original job. And that's why I'm here. Something like that. If you can say that kind of thing, I'd recommend that. That would be an amazing answer. Okay? You focus on your strengths. You focus on how maybe the last job ended up not being a great fit, but your strengths make you a great fit for this job, right? And you're doing a couple of things here. First of all, you're sort of deflecting the question. Secondly, you are bringing the conversation back to this job, because that's what you want to talk about in a job interview. You don't want to be there for 10 minutes talking about the details of what you did in some other job that has nothing to do with this job. Okay? You want to bring the discussion to this job, right? That's always going to be your efforts. Okay? If they want to talk about your past or, what you did somewhere else, you always try and get off that question quickly, bring it back to this position and how you can be a great fit and what you can bring all the stuff you have to serve this job. Okay? So that would be how I'd answer this. Okay? Those are some options there depending on your situation. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay, over to you guys. Amazed is here. Amazed says another trap question is mention one thing you dislike about your current or previous job. Exactly. Excuse me. So, for example, how would you answer that type of question? They say mention one thing you dislike about, your current job or your past job. They're trying to bait you. They're trying to entrap you. Because the moment you start actually answering that question and saying, oh yeah, my current job, they're all just a bunch of jackasses. They have no idea what they're doing. I mean, if it hadn't been for me working for them, they wouldn't know what to do. The moment you start giving them what they've purportedly asked for, you lose. They eliminate you. They go, you're a terrible person. Thank you for being so forthcoming. Now we can see that. It helps us know where we stand, right? And where we stand is we're not going to hire you. Okay, so you don't take the bait. You'd say something like, if they ask you, what was it? Mention one thing you dislike about your current or previous. You would answer, well, I really can't think of anything I really dislike about it. I mean, it's a job and there's a lot of great things about it. I think the people are really good and I think the work is, I have no issues with any of it really. So, it's kind of a tough question. Can't really think of anything, and it's stupid, but that's how you pass the question, right? You don't take the bait. Ghosts says, or you left a job because you might have been injured. Well, this is the thing, Ghosts, okay? Is being injured a good thing or a bad thing? It's a bad thing. Do we want to be injured? Is the company happy you are injured? Are you happy you're injured? No. It's a bad thing, right? Now, being injured is a bad thing for the company, right? It's not just on a humanistic level. It's actually a liability, a financial liability for the company, right? Depending on what country you're in, it works different ways, but whichever way you figure it, the company either will pay more money out because you were injured in some way, or they are likely, they run the risk of paying more money out to workers' compensation or medical insurance or whatever you have going in whatever country and region you're in. Okay. So it's a bad thing. So what you're saying is to them is like, oh yeah, I'm the type of employee that gets injured a lot. That's the impression you're making. Okay. Just like you wouldn't say, oh, I was fired, because being fired is a bad thing. And if they don't have a clue who you are, they just met you, and the first thing out of your mouth is, oh, I got fired. Are you going to get a good impression of that person? No, you're going to think that person is someone who tends to get fired. Here's a person who tends to get injured. Maybe they're accident prone. Maybe they have an issue with following safety procedures, but we don't know, but they seem to get injured, right? Past behavior predicts future behavior. I would keep the fact you were injured under your hat at the interview. That's not what you want to lead with when you're trying to make a good impression. So if they ask you about stuff that indirectly leads to this, like this is the answer to why you left, I would not disclose that. GC John says, is it fair to say corporate restructure? Yeah, it's just another term for like layoffs. But I would be clear. I wouldn't use like some sort of unintuitive corporate flavor of the month, management speak. I would say I was laid off, like just so that we're clear of what I'm saying here. It was a layoff, and you could use different words for it, but whatever words you use, I'd make sure that they understand what you're saying. Because corporate restructure, like just to give you some background here, if you care about this, you know how there's a lot of euphemisms that smooth over like ugly things, right? They'll dress it up by using a fancy, pretty word, In the world of business, they've had a lot of euphemisms for mass firings, right? Companies don't want to say they're engaged in mass firings because that sounds ugly, right? Instead, they'll say, we're doing a reorganization, right? It's like a nice euphemism for what they're really doing, which is canning people, right? So you don't want the interviewer left to guess of what really happened to you, because they might guess that, oh, is that code for like they canned your ass, because you sucked at your job? Like, you want to be very clear. It was a layoff. I was laid off with everyone in my department, en masse, right? Had nothing to do with my performance. It was simply the company was cutting back on its labor force. They were downsizing their workforce, and I was laid off without cause. Amaze says, you're right, Bill. I like that. I like that comment. I got to get that tattooed on my forehead. Stating that you quit a job even for reasons is a potential red flag, arguably as bad as being fired. Honestly, it's like a double-edged sword. Sad. Yeah, it is. It is. And this is the kind of thing you walk into, right? Welcome to the world of being interrogated, right? They'll ask you all kinds of questions where if you were to give them what they're asking for, you lose, right? It's an entrapment type question, and this is one of them. It's like saying, what's your greatest weakness? If I give you full and complete information, you'll eliminate me right there on the spot. So you got to be diplomatic. Ms. says, I've been unemployed 4 years because it took that long to recover from a severe disability I developed after getting the COVID vaccine. I'm sorry to hear that. That really sucks. I've heard of like long COVID, and that is scary as all hell. There's a prominent YouTuber called Physics Girl, who's famously had her encounter with long COVID, and that's absolutely terrible. It's a real thing. So I'm sorry to hear that you had something similar. Should I tell the truth or just say I was a homemaker for 4 years? Okay, in this type of question, what you want to listen, let's start with what your goal is and then work backwards to what you should say. Your goal is to say something that A, satisfies their question, so they get an answer that makes sense to them, okay? Now, also, you want to give an answer that doesn't raise any further red flags. What does this say about you, okay? So if you were to say, I have a severe long-term disability, or I had a disability that lasted, for several years or something, the risk is that because they don't know you, they could get the impression of like, oh, are you the type of person that's disabled that is going off on disability often and for long periods, you know? Because if you are, then you might not be a good person for us to pick. We're afraid that if we hire you, you will immediately go off on disability and stay there for a long time. And that's not what we're looking for if we can avoid it. We want someone who's going to work. You know, that's why we're hiring. So you don't want to give that impression. So one way is to say like, okay, here's what happened, but do it. If you could say it in such a way that people are left with the impression that, oh, that was a one-time only thing, that was a very exceptional circumstance, and that's not going to come up again, right? That's one option, okay? Another option is like you suggested, is just obfuscate it and don't mention disability. Say, you know, you were at home, so you had to be a homemaker, so you're going to mention the homemaker part, but you're not going to refer to the disability, right? If they say why you're at home, you're just like, well, you know, I decided to make a change, you know. That's another possibility too. I can't say if in your situation, which one would be a better answer, because I don't know what your situation is in detail, but those are the sort of constraints of what you're working with. So you could say that, or you could do alternatives like admitting the disability if you can frame it in a way that like everybody agrees, oh yeah, that was a one-time only thing. That's not happening again, you know? Like, for example, I know this is a bit grim, but like, you know, if you were off for several years taking care of a sick family member who has since passed away, you know, like, okay, that's over, right? That's not coming up again, right? You know, so you know what I mean? It depends how you can frame it. James says, actually saw you were live and I'm currently getting my space ready for a second interview. Okay, well, best of luck there, James. If you have any specific questions, let me know. Ghost says, the one thing I dislike at the job is the coffee. Yeah, like hot cups of mud with a little bit of dandruff, you know, stirred in and a couple of pebbles, you know, that kind of thing. Yeah, that type of thing is a known issue in some places. The coffee is revolting. James, speaking of revolting coffee, James says, the company's expert, what kind of questions might you ask in regard to a contractor role? Okay, now what do you mean asking? Are you the interviewer? Or is this at the end of the interview where they say, do you have any questions for us? If you could explain. Al Gore, no, Al Gall says, what if the company stopped to pay salary and this is the main reason to leave? Is that okay to say in an interview? Now, this is a case where technically it might seem like it's okay to say because technically it was no fault of your own. However, it's a negative type thing. I would stay away from it. I would say some nice sounding other reason rather than say that, because that could conceivably, depending on the person that's interviewing you, give them the impression that, you know, you're like, you know, you complain a lot, or that, you know, you just tend to have a lot of issues. Don't worry about the logic. There's no logic here. It's all about impressions, right? You know, like for example, let's pretend somebody showed up at a job interview, a candidate showed up at a job interview, and the interviewer starts an interview with them, says, hello, it's great to meet you. So how are you doing? And they say, well, guess what happened to me? I was on my way over here and then I got hit by a car, you know, and then like the person getting out of the car then flipped me off, you know, so they yelled a bunch of insults at me. So I had to like, you know, put them in their place. And then this other thing, you know, is that technically your fault? You're describing being the victim of circumstance. It's just the conspicuousness of you spouting a bunch of negative things when they first meet you. That's what leads to a very unfavorable, weird first impression, right? So it's not that this is bad in itself. It's just that the fact that you're bringing up a bunch of weird, questionable, negative stuff in an interview, that leads to a weird, bad first impression, even though technically it's not your fault. But the fact that you're choosing to get into that at this exact moment is what's weird, okay? Don't look for logic. I'm just going off on like human emotions and impressions, right? And that's what's actually going on here. What people want to hear is they want to hear everything's great, right? They ask you, so how you doing? What they want to hear is, oh, I'm doing great. If they say, how you doing today? And you say, well, let me tell you, the first thing that happened is blah, blah, blah. Do they really want to get into that? No, they don't, right? Most people, when they say like, how you doing, right? So that's kind of what's going on here. So I wouldn't get into it, and also when you think about it, it has nothing to do with this job that you're interviewing for. So it distracts, it takes away. If you only have 5 minutes of talk time during this entire interview to sell yourself, are you going to want to expend 3 minutes of that talking about how your last company had issues with the payroll? No, right? So I wouldn't mention it. Ghost says, my boss died. Then I guess it's good that your name is Ghost. Did they die by your hand? No, I'm just joking. Although that would be a funny joke in an interview. If you really were bold, that would be good. If you are being serious, then my deepest condolences. That really sucks. GTA Lives says, should I allow my 2-year employment gap in my CV or should I cover it up with fake experience? Well, I wouldn't, look, when you say fake experience, if you're outright lying and saying you worked somewhere when you didn't, I wouldn't do that because that can, these things don't usually work out. Sometimes they do, but the odds is that they don't. Okay, one way or another, that can come back to bite you. And if it does, and they discover what you've done, it can be very bad. So, and what I mean by that is not only will they turn you down for this job, but there's some instances where they blacklist you in an industry or amongst a group of companies or, something like that. So it's really not worth it, okay? In my opinion. Some people do it and get away with it, but I honestly wouldn't. I think the odds are stacked against that working out. The most obvious thing is that, they can do background checks, reference checks. They have access to, in most countries, they have access to your tax information from the government. The government in most countries knows where you work because the company employing you gets money from the government sometimes and has to pay taxes sometimes, depending on who they're employing and how much they're paying them, right? So that is all documented. So that stuff is available to employers in some capacity, depending on what country you're in. So they could verify that stuff if they wanted to, unless it's all under the table, some really casual thing. They can verify that if they wanted to. So I would try not to do that. I would try to obfuscate it. If you just if it's a current work gap, meaning that it's been 2 years since you were last employed, that's going to be a little bit harder to cover up. If it was a previous work gap where you were off for 5 years, but then you got another job, and then now you're coming here, right? It's like a previous work gap. People won't care about that as much. You could maybe get away with covering that up. You know what I mean? The best thing is to say, for work gaps, the conventional wisdom is to try and convey that it's not that you're out of work. It's not that you're doing nothing. It was a conscious decision to go back to school or get training or do other things like volunteer work, charitable work, right? But it's part of some plan. And a great way to frame it is to say, I wanted to brush up on my skills, so I took some time off. This was great, but I wanted to position myself for the future. And what I did was I took some time off. I went back to school, so I wasn't working. I went back to school during that time, and I took this training, and that training has recently been completed. And now that my schooling is over, now I'm ready to rejoin the workforce. Now that I've strengthened my skills in these areas, this is what I took. This is what I've added to my capabilities, and that's what brings me here because I'm ready to apply those skills along with my experience to work in this role. Something like that, right? Now, if you're kind of panicking a little because it's oh crap, I didn't actually take any training. Go out right now, go take some free internet courses or something, and then you can say honestly, truthfully, yes, I have gone and gotten some training, and I've rounded out my skill sets, and I've got new training in AI or whatever, and I'm more capable because of it. So that's a great way of like framing the work gap as no, it's not a cause of concern. It's a legitimate career move. I wanted to do this. I did that. That makes me more valuable. And now I'm here, right? So that's how I would try and do it if you can do it. Gamer says, yeah, most people say they're doing like a degree or MBA to fill gaps. Yeah, I take exception to that because an MBA is actually a pretty effing damn useful thing. Is it the be all end all? No. But in terms of like what it's teaching, it's the scientific study of how to make money. Like, don't tell me that's not useful, right? If you understand how to make money, it's like where there's issues is that some people want to believe that it's like the absolute be all end all. You can go at age 21, take an MBA, come out of there and just dominate. And it's like, no. If you don't know anything about people, you've never had a real job, obviously you're going to be at a disadvantage. There's a lot of other skills you need to know. But an MBA is a very real thing, that if you take a legitimate MBA, it's very, very useful. And obviously I'm biased because I sell a course that's like what's really a program that does it. But I mean, I do that because I myself have an MBA and it's effing useful. Half of what I'm doing on YouTube is based on principles from an MBA. I ran a company. It's useful. So it isn't like a filler kind of thing. So you could take business classes or you could take AI and all the latest flavor of the month stuff. And I would say AI simply because recruiters, how can I say this without being a jackass? It's like a lot of them are kind of dumb. They're not tuned into a lot of things, but they hear the word, so they understand, oh, this is hot right now. So if you name drop that word, they go, oh, that's like a really cool, useful thing. They don't know, it might not be related to what you do, but it'll strike a chord with them, right? So that's why I say things like AI, Ghost says freelance gig work can be phrased how on a resume, ghostwriter and math tutor. I don't know. I don't know about ghostwriting and being a math tutor. In general, yes, you can put that stuff. I mean, other than just stating it for what it is, say it's contract work, like I'm a tutor and I do this. The only thing about entrepreneurial type stuff, okay, is that if you have a bunch of that stuff on your resume, okay, and then you're trying to get a regular conventional job working as an employee, right, as opposed to a contractor, you're shooting for trying to be an employee again. That can raise some red flags with recruiters because if, like, you and I both know that entrepreneurial type stuff is awesome and it says a lot of great things about you. You have initiative, you have understanding of business, understanding of people, you have understanding of marketing as well as operations. Like it says all kinds of great things. We all know that. But recruiters don't interpret it that way. They see an entrepreneurial type venture as a conflict of interest. You're wanting to be an employee and work for us, but yet you've got your own thing going on the side, or you have had your own thing going on the side. We don't know if it's over or not. You say that's all in the past, but we don't really know that for sure. You're the type of person that has their own creative thing that you do. We're worried that you might be conflicted between your loyalty to us and your loyalty to doing your own thing. If you're making money doing your own thing, why would you want to work here? But why would you want to work here, but you're also trying to do your own thing? That if you had to choose, we believe you're going to choose your own thing over us. So that makes you a riskier candidate, right? It's stupid because, as I said, you and I both know that this stuff is gold. This stuff is great. The problem is that they're thinking in terms of loyalty and dependency on them. And from that perspective, being a contractor, doing your own stuff, that takes away from, obvious loyalty to them as an employer. You're reliant on them less. You can generate money by yourself without them. And so that's where they're coming from. So on the one hand, you want to say this stuff to illustrate your skills to them. You see, here's what I can do. On the other hand, the fact that you're disclosing you've done this can make you a riskier prospect in their eyes. That's the conflict. So you will have to exercise your discretion on which job you're going for. If you're going for like a writing position, then I would say you're a ghostwriter. But if you're not going for like a writing thing directly, I would say take that off, because it'll probably do more harm than good in that situation. Does that make sense? David says, if you were on a contract-based job and the contract finished, then how to approach this question, since the recruiter might think why the contract was not extended? Well, once again, I would refer to kind of the principles I already mentioned. I would first of all disclose this. I'd say it was a contract term. The term came to an end, and because of financial constraints, the company was downsizing. They were not renewing a lot of their contracts of this nature. So you're basically admitting that you were laid off in a sense. You're saying it was purely for financial reasons. The company was, they were in dire straits financially. And so the first thing they did was, rather than, before they started doing layoffs, their first step was to not renew contract employees. So there was a lot of contract employees that were let go or that weren't renewed, and I was one of them. So that's what happened there. So you're saying like, it wasn't just me, it was like a whole bunch of other people like me, and for all you know, that's what they did. Maybe you know that for a fact, or maybe you don't know it for a fact. I think you could surmise that they probably did that, right? And to be honest with you, I know this is kind of weird to say, but that would be okay for me. I wouldn't judge you for it. You know what I mean? The bottom line is that you can do the job, and there was nothing fishy about this contract work that you did. You know what I mean? So why make yourself look bad when there is no real negative thing there? You know what I mean? So I wouldn't judge you if you said an answer like that. Saku says, name drop buzzwords to recruiters. Got it. No, that's not what I'm saying at all. It's like, I really don't give a crap about recruiters, and buzzwords are stupid. I don't go in for them myself, nor do I recommend that anybody else does it. James Giles says, what I am hearing is that you're making apps on the side and plan to diversify your income with them, and don't mention it or talk about them as non-paying projects, not work. What? Okay, well, that's not what I said. I didn't talk about non-paying projects. What I was asked about, what if I have I've done contract work and the contract came to an end. That's what I was asked. So my answer in a nutshell was, no, I was asked about, what was it? Ghostwriting and being a math tutor, right? How would you phrase that on a resume? And I was saying that depending on what you're going for, they will regard those as bad in the sense that you are doing them on the side. Recruiters for full-time employment jobs don't like people putting entrepreneurial ventures on their resume because they regard that as a risk. It's stupid, but they do, because they're looking at it from a loyalty perspective. Okay? So I did not say any of those things. You have misinterpreted what I said. So there we go. Should I include professional summary in the CV for mid-level HVAC engineer job? You can. I mean, it depends on the job, like what they're asking for. I'm not a fan of professional summaries. As we go increasingly into the future, if you're applying for a posted job, they spend less and less time looking at your resume. Okay, that goes for humans looking at your resume. Like, what is it that they say? It's like 6 seconds or some crap like that. Now in 6 seconds, if that's all a human is going to look at your resume, if you get that far, are they going to read a paragraph? Like when you say professional summary, that's what I interpret it as, like a big paragraph. This is who I am. They're not going to read that, right? Instead, I would gravitate to like bullet points, right? And the bullet points will change because you're tailoring your resume to whatever job you're applying to. And if you're not, you should, because that's the only way you're really going to get any bites, generally speaking. So I would tailor it. I would put bullet points, and I would not do a professional summary. I would favor bullet points that directly speak to the things they mentioned using their lingo. It talks about the requirements that were mentioned in the job posting. It's a direct answer to each of those. Zanzuki says, so Bill, how would you answer this question if you were fired? Well, all you need to do is you need to go back, 20 minutes? 30 minutes when I answered that. It took me like 20 minutes to answer that question because there's a lot to it, but I did that earlier in this stream. I answered that question at the first thing in this stream. So go back and watch that. I can't say it all again. Ghost says, best number of degrees to list on a resume when applying outside academia. Don't bother with listing undergrad. I don't know. I mean, am I in academia? Here's what you do, Ghosts, okay? Like, listen, you can get a full, complete, and informed answer to that question. Who are the people that would know that? It's people in academia who have successfully gotten a job in academia, right? So those are the people that would know that very specific answer to that very specific question, okay? Now, this can be a learning opportunity for you if you don't know how to do this, okay? Some people know how to do this, and that's fine. But if you've never had to do anything like this, this is a great opportunity, okay? What you're going to want to do is you're going to want to do a search on LinkedIn, okay? You may need the premium version of LinkedIn. If you do, just do the free month where they give it to you for free for a month. Cancel before the end of the month. You don't have to pay anything. Do a people search for this thing, like academia, or within academia, what faculty, what department, what subject are you talking about? What role? Like if you're going for like a associate professor position or something, like whatever you're going for, do a search for that title in your hometown. Okay. And the result, it's a people search. So the result will be individuals who have that in their profile. So either they're currently working as an associate professor or they've previously worked as an associate professor. That's why their profile shows up as a result. Okay. Now that you have this results of all these different people that have done the thing that you want to do, they've been in the role or they are in the role that you want. Okay. You also now can reach out to them because LinkedIn is not just a way of discovering people. It's a way of sending messages, like reaching out to people, right? So you could send them connection requests. You could send them in-mails. You could, if they have posted their email address or something, you could do an email, I suppose. But you would then reach out to these people and you say like, listen, I have some questions. I'd love to get your expert opinion on, academia now and where it's going, based on your experiences. I'm wondering if you could spare me a few minutes. We could have a quick phone call, or we could maybe meet up, and I'd love to just be able to get your expert opinion on some questions about where academia is going, something like that. And a lot of people won't respond, or a few of them will say no, but a few people will say yes. And it's like a ratio. It's like, is it 5%, 10%? So you send that out like a default sort of message to 100 people. You'll get 5 people that say, sure, yeah, we could talk about it. Here's my number. Or if you want to come down and meet me at my office, like I'm free here, here, and here, right? And then you go down and you ask them precise questions like this and say, like, when you got this job, what was the climate of opinion, and like how to get a job in academia? And, do you need to do this? Do you need to do that? How does it work in your experience? And ask them these questions. That's how you get specific answers to very specific, industry-specific questions. They might be both industry-specific and specific to your location, like your region, or your, like a specific organization or something. That's how you can get this information. So if you've never done that kind of thing before, consider trying it just as like a life skill. So now, going forward, any kind of very specific thing that you're wondering that, would be very helpful to you in your career to know how to do that and how it all works, you can get answers to it. I would take this opportunity to try that if you've never done anything like that before. Saku says, "Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to misrepresent." It's absolutely okay, Saku. I didn't mean to come to jump on you there. I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you're participating. Hopefully, you're getting something out of it. Listen, if I can answer a question for you, just ask me the question, and I'll be happy to try and answer it as best I can. Zanzuki says, "Yes, thank you, sir. You're absolutely welcome." Great Wolf says, "To mention that your job was no longer fit to your job." What? "To mention that your job was no longer fit to your job, and the interview you are asking who quit the job. Is it good to say that you were terminated without having discussed about it?" I don't quite understand the grammar of what you're asking, Great Wolf. But listen, I answered this question the first thing I did in this live stream. So go rewind to the beginning, because I spent like 20 minutes like talking about this. So if you missed that, maybe go back and rewatch that, if that would be useful. Rafid says, "I have an interview tomorrow. It's on the same company that I'm currently working, but in a different department." Okay, how would I answer the question then? Well, it depends. I mean, first of all, you didn't quit your last job, right? You're still in your last job, right? Now, that's the answer to that question if they're referring to your current job. If they're referring to your previous job before you came to this company, then see my original answer at the beginning of this live stream, right? Does that make sense? You know, if they say, "Why did you leave your last job?" and you haven't left your last job, you're still working there, you're still working here in your old department, right? Great Wolf says, "Job title." No, sorry, I still don't understand. Like, I get you. Your job duties have morphed beyond your job title being an accurate description. Is that what you're saying? I don't still understand how that ties into why did you quit your job? You know what I mean? Like, sorry, you have to explain. Ghost, top things recruiters dislike? I don't know. No idea. Obviously, you're going to get all kinds of things, and I don't like stuff like that. Rafid says, "Makes sense. Thank you, Bill." Okay, happy to help, Rafid. I wish you best of luck with that. Usually, listen, when you're getting hired for something internally, there's usually a lot of politics involved, and it really, you know how like getting a job is based on several things. One of the things is like how qualified you are, like how suitable you would be in that role. Their estimate of your performance in that role, right? Internal job hiring has even less to do with that, right? Because usually a big factor is the department where you're currently working, can they spare you? How much disruption will occur if you leave that department to go somewhere else? And as a general rule, bosses do not want their employees to leave. Because, regardless of how they feel about you, it's disruptive for them. They have now there's like a vacancy in their work group or whatever. They have, a person overboard. They have a person missing. So it's disruptive. So they will not assist you, generally speaking, in leaving them and creating that disruption. So there's a lot of political stuff going on there. The problem with hiring internally is that you plug one hole, but you create another, right? That's the problem, right? If you just had a vacancy and you fill it with an outside candidate, an external hire, then you plug the hole. It's great. But an internal hire, you plug that hole, but you create another hole where they came from. So from the point of view of the organization, there's a disadvantage of hiring the internal employee. There's reasons why you do it. The advantages, of course, is that they're getting someone that's tried and true. They know what you're like as an employee because they've seen you up close. You've been working for them. So you have more credibility to them, more predictability than an external candidate who they never worked with. That person could turn out to be crazy. They could turn out to be a fraud. They could turn out to have been lying about everything on their resume. You don't know. With you, they know that that's not the case. They've seen you. They like you. You've lasted a long time in the organization. So you're much less of a risk to them. But it creates disruption when you move from one position. So usually there's two managers involved, your old boss and the potential new boss, and how they work together and how much clout each one has. That starts having a big effect on whether you get hired or not. It's really not about you as much anymore. You know what I mean? Surfs Up says, just started the new role. Currently, employees seem nice and generally invested, but are openly critical of the org in different pockets. Red flag or just human. That's human nature. Everywhere you go, people like talk about everyone behind their back, and they badmouth the company and they badmouth the boss. That's natural. A certain amount of that is natural, right? You know what I mean? If you work at a place where the morale is very low, people will be doing more of that, right? If you work at a place that the morale is very high, people will do less of it, but it'll still be there, right? People will gripe. That's just normal. A certain amount of it is normal. Okay, get in the chat. I see there's 53 people here. Thank you for joining me today. While I'm waiting for the next questions to roll on in, check out the courses that I have. I got several courses here. I'm going to try and do this over here. If you want to learn business, if I can orient my finger properly, check out that course. But if you're looking to get hired, okay, check out my Get Hired course. That's a very popular course. There's a link in the description box. I'll speak to the camera. There's a link in the description box below, and I've done frequently asked questions videos on it, so you can see how it works, what you get, so it's as transparent as possible. It's basically all my learning in one place, and it will help you with two things. It'll help you with applying for jobs in the posted job market, okay? But it will also help you in applying for jobs in the hidden job market. Now, I was just doing something before we went live here, and I'd like to show you something if I can. Okay. I went to ChatGPT just before we started, and I asked this question just for the hell of it to see what it would say. What's the percentage of people who get hired through networking? Because somebody had asked this question in a comment on one of my videos. And here, as you can see, it says, studies suggest that 70 to 85% of jobs are filled through networking rather than traditional applications. So this is instead of the job being posted, okay? So these jobs are not posted. Additionally, around 80% of job openings are never publicly advertised, meaning they are filled through referrals and internal connections. While the exact percentage varies by industry and country, networking remains one of the most effective ways to secure a job. Now, why am I saying this to you? Okay, a couple of reasons. First of all, let's be clear. A lot of recruiters don't talk about this. As you can see, the reality is that most people don't go through recruiters to get a job. They talk to the hiring manager directly. And just so everyone knows, the hiring manager is the boss, okay? So if you get a job, the hiring manager is the person that you will report to, okay? They become your boss, right? That's a different thing from the recruiter. The recruiter is not your boss. The recruiter is someone that's brought in to help with hiring, to help with finding candidates for the job. And their background is in HR. That means like labor laws, employment standards, how to do recruiting, stuff like that. How to find candidates that have certain requirements, how to read resumes, all that kind of stuff. And that's all they do 9 to 5. They help find candidates and they interview candidates, and that's what they're always doing. Okay, so that's a recruiter. The hiring manager has nothing to do with filling a job. That's not what they do. They're the boss. So if you get a job, you report to them. They're your boss, right? Now, when people are talking about this, filled through networking, okay, I just want everyone to understand, this is not talking to recruiters, okay? This is talking to the hiring managers, right? The hiring managers are the ones that have the power to hire, right? They're the ones that decide, I need a new person in my work group. And I've gotten approval from my higher ups that I've been given a budget and I've been given approval to go out and hire another person for my work group. So I'm going to do that. If I want to, I cannot do that if I feel we can handle the work. But I've decided to do that. And I decide what skills they should have. I decide who we pick, right? Because ultimately that person is going to report to me, right? And I want to make sure that we can work well together, okay? So that's what the hiring manager is. That's who they are, right? So they're not an expert at like finding like, candidates that would have a list of requirements. They are asked to write a job description. They are asked to write the requirements. What do you need in a person? And then they give those requirements to a recruiter. And the recruiter is a grunt. The recruiter goes out and their job is to find a list of candidates that has these requirements. They don't write the requirements. They're given the requirements. They have to now go out and find candidates that meet these requirements. That's all a recruiter does. A lot of times a recruiter is an entry-level job. Okay, so when we talk about networking, like all this business here, we're talking about networking with hiring managers, okay? So it's not about like contacting recruiters, okay? That's not what this is referring to. Now, some people recommend you contact recruiters. That's fine. I don't, okay? I think it's a waste of time. I think there are far more productive, forthcoming things you can do than contact recruiters. You could certainly contact hiring managers, do informational interviews, reach out directly to organizations. There's all kinds of stuff that can generate all kinds of opportunities. And I've done those things throughout my career, and they've always been very, very productive. But the catch is you need to know what to do. You need to know who to talk to, what to say to them, what's reasonable and what's unreasonable, right? A lot of people kind of don't get that because they've never been introduced to this before. So they would like contact someone, they say like, dude, give me a job. And it's like, no, I don't know who you are. No, that's not how this works, right? It's a little more sophisticated than that. And to give you an idea, the simplest possible thing you can do that's effective is to contact people high up in companies in your hometown and send out a very short message just saying, hey, I'm here. I do this. I solve this problem. If ever you're looking for someone who can do that for you, please let me know because I'd love to work for your company. I know a bit about you guys. I know you do great work. That's all. Have yourself a great day. There you go. Now most people that would go to, they're not looking to hire someone like you just right now, right? But a few of them, they will be, right? It's statistical probability. And it's a ratio. Maybe it's 10%, maybe it's 5%, maybe it's 1%. But just like you can apply for like 800 jobs in a day by blasting out the same resume to all these different jobs, you can send that message to well over 100 people in a day, like 100 executives or something. Now, if only 1% of them, happens to be hiring right now for someone like you, you'll get one response saying, would you like to have a phone call? Or maybe we should get together. We might have something. We should get together. You know what I mean? You generate one of those in a day after sending out 100 messages. You know what I mean? You could generate one of those every day, right? So that's a lot of leads you can investigate. So anyway, my point is like, that's what networking looks like for introverts. There's a lot of other ways to do networking. Obviously, if you're more extroverted, you can go to events, you can go to job fairs. There's all kinds of things you can do. But for introverts, this is like a real thing. So if you've never been exposed to this, wake up to it. This is why I'm showing stuff like this, because people don't believe me when I say this stuff. Some people think the hidden job market is some kind of conspiracy that doesn't exist. It's like, no, it isn't. I mean, I've built a consulting business being in the hidden job market. The last several jobs I've had going back 15 years have all been in the hidden job market. So it's very real. And I've taught in university. I've helped students tap this and some of them have gotten jobs doing this. Anyway, so wake up to the stuff. Listening to recruiters is a thing. Recruiters know their stuff when it comes to getting a job through a recruiter, certainly. And maybe for other things too. Some of them know a bit, but that's not the only thing at your disposal. So if you're feeling a bit depressed or whatever, you're looking at like the posted jobs out there and it's not looking wonderful, just remember that's like 20% of all the jobs that are out there. There's another 80% There's even more jobs than that are hidden, that are not posted publicly. They're there and you could get them. It's just that you won't discover them by looking on the internet on job aggregators and job boards. You have to do direct outreach and other type of activities to surface those jobs, but you can certainly get them even if you know absolutely nobody. Okay, let's come back. We got a couple of things here. Surfs Up says, did I do this one? No, yeah, I did that one. Okay, Ghost says, so a coworker was recently terminated for having an affair, okay, with a legal department attorney. How will that affect his job prospects? Well, it may affect them, but it may not be the end of the world, depending on the details. The devil's in the details, you know what I mean? It's like saying, I've done one bad thing. How will that affect me? It's like, well, for some people, it could be the kiss of death. That's it. It's all over. Other people, it hardly does anything. You know what I mean? It just depends on the details and the circumstances. Rafid. So, the other thing I'll say here is that, why is this? Well, one of the reasons is that every single organization approaches hiring in a slightly different way. This is the thing. Because we're talking about essentially spotting talent. That's what this is. Now, it's well known and it's been well documented with data for several decades at least that spotting talent is damn hard. Like even some of the smartest, most skilled people in the world, when you give them lots of resources to work with, they have a hard time spotting talent. Now, what we're talking about here is people trying to spot talent, and they're not spending a lot of money at it or time. They're like trying to do it on the cheap. They're trying to really economize, and they're not exactly using their best and brightest. They're using recruiters it's generally an entry-level job, and they're trying to spot talent with those people under those circumstances. It's an impossible task. And as a result, they're very bad at it. Now, in all fairness to them, it's one of the hardest challenges to do, right? But they're even worse at it because they're not doing it properly, right? They're doing it on the cheap. They're doing it on the fly quickly, right? Now, you can look at this as bad. The whole process is very ineffective, and it is. Job interviews are very, very bad at actually determining who would be a good employee and who's not. We've known this for many, many years. In management science, this has been a known thing for several decades. They've demonstrated this with data across the board. But one of the side effects of that is because there's no real clear right way of doing it that everyone can just do and have it work out great. Everybody's got their own opinion on how to do it. So every organization approaches it slightly differently. Like when you look at the salary question, how much value do you have as an employee? How much should we pay you? Everybody's got a different method of assigning a dollar value or a currency value to an employee with certain things, right? This is also evidenced by the fact that you could get a job one place, it's terrible. Your boss fires you for cause. They think that you're terrible. Meanwhile, or afterwards, you then go to another employer where this just happens to work out. They think you're wonderful. They give you bonuses. You stay there for years. They sing you praises, right? You haven't really changed. It's a different employer that treats you differently and regards you differently, right? So it's not like everyone's doing the same thing, and it's not like everybody's looking at these things the same way. All organizations are doing this slightly differently, and there's some wild variations in this. So you're asking me questions about if I do this, will that be bad? Yeah, for some employers, they'll regard that as an absolute deal breaker. You go to another employer, they don't care about that. They don't see that as a problem. You know what I mean? Maybe the boss has had a string of affairs with coworkers or something. I don't know. Nothing illegal, nothing non-consensual or anything. But they don't see that as an issue. Maybe they're you have some guy who's an eligible bachelor or some woman who's had a lot of, relationships. It's like they don't see that as any kind of issue. So you fit right in. They actually regard that as a plus. Oh, you will get our culture here, You never know. It takes all kinds, right? So that's the great thing about this. It can be an advantage if some people look at you and they judge you and they don't think you're that good. You go somewhere else, they look at you and they think you're wonderful, So there's a huge element of luck and random chance to this. Rafid says, follow up. I don't have previous experience. The role I'm applying for, despite having 9 years of experience on a different department, I have a master's on data science. Is this sufficient answer to leave a job? Well, I can't answer that for you. I mean, it depends what your career goals are, and it depends on a lot of other details. You need to decide for yourself if it makes sense for you to leave. I can't answer that for you. And I certainly can't answer it going off just this, 2 sentences that you've written me, okay? It doesn't matter what your qualifications are if you have a goal of doing a specific thing and you say, I enjoy doing this and I don't enjoy this other thing that I'm qualified for, right? In which case, despite being qualified for it, it's probably the right thing for you to leave it. Maybe you hate that work. You find it extremely boring, right? Personally, I'm someone who has had a non-standard career path. I took a degree in electrical engineering. I never worked as an engineer. I went completely in a different way. And then I became a manager and then a consultant and a YouTuber on the side. So it's I didn't do what my qualifications were for, right? But the reason I didn't is because I found there was many other things out there that you could do of which I had been previously ignorant. I didn't know that stuff existed. Had I known, I might have chosen to go in that direction. But I sort of did what do you call it, a pivot? I did that a couple of times, and I've worked across 5 industries. That has certain advantages. It also has certain disadvantages. So, what's right for you? I can't answer that. But if you have questions about this stuff, a good thing to do is to talk to people who have been in the situations that you're wondering about. So, for example, you said you're moving from data science, as I understand it. I don't know what role you're going to, but it might be an idea to sit down, like in a perfect world, you could have done this in advance. You would sit down with people who are in that department and you ask them about it. What does this world involve? Tell me about this world, how it works. You guys don't do statistical analysis all day long. What do you guys do? Why is that exciting? Why is that does it open up a lot of career options for you? Why is that type of work appealing? How does this relate to real world results or accomplishments? Just ask them stuff like this and you might get a new appreciation for it. We don't know stuff until we're exposed to it. So seek out some of this and you might learn a lot of interesting things. And you might realize that, wow, you're actually suited and qualified to do things you never even considered. And that's a real option for you, That might be an outcome of it. Rafid says, it makes sense for me, absolutely. I really love data science when I studied it and did some projects, and that's why I'm interested. But my point is, will it be sufficient from a recruiter perspective? Listen, who cares? Now remember, I just showed you guys this, right? You don't need to talk to recruiters. What matters is you talk to a hiring manager. If the boss thinks that you're good in that role, right? That's all that matters. Who cares what a recruiter thinks? Recruiters, as I've spent the last 15 minutes sort of explaining, they're not very good judges of employees. They're trying to spot talent. And as we've established, spotting talent is damn hard in the best of times. Recruiters have an even greater challenge because they're entry-level employees working on a budget and they're trying to spot talent. And usually they're not looking for the best employee. They're looking for the least risky employee. That's why recruiters put so much faith in metrics like years of experience. and they derive completely bogus conclusions like saying, oh, you've been in the role for 5 years, you've been in the role for 8 years, therefore you will be the better employee. It's like, no, not necessarily. In fact, a lot of times that's not the case, right? There's a lot of contradictions in their reasoning. And I'm not beating up on recruiters. It's the theory they've been taught, okay? And I know the theory because I used to teach it in university. I understand like the principles behind this stuff, and they're very, very flimsy. You know? So the bottom line for you, Rafid, is that it doesn't matter what the recruiter thinks if a hiring manager wants to hire you. And there's someone who doesn't deal with HR. There's someone who deals with data science or wherever you're going. You're wanting to move from customer service to data science. So there's someone who either deals with customer service or data science. If you talk to the hiring manager for the data science department and, you know, they like you. Maybe they like the fact that you're enthusiastic about it. Maybe they like the fact that you're easy to deal with, you're passionate about it, you're professional in how you present yourself, you're very agreeable. So, you know, if they have a question for you or they have a request from you, it's never a problem. Unbeknownst to you, maybe those qualities outweigh your technical qualities in data science. Maybe the boss is of the opinion that, look, if you're passionate about data science and you're very easy to deal with and very agreeable, you know, but you have like a knowledge of mathematics or something, we can teach you like how to do the data science role in like under a month. You know, like not having a data science degree or something, that's not the end of the world. You can overcome that. You only use a tiny fraction of that degree here anyway. We do very specific work in a very specific area, you know, for the entry-level job or for whatever job it is you're going for. Maybe that's how it turns out. So, you know what I mean? All that matters is that the hiring manager likes you and thinks that you have potential, right? So it really doesn't matter about how recruiters assess you, all these kind of crazy out to lunch, fuzzy logic kind of ways of assessing somebody's suitability as a candidate. If the manager wants to hire you, damn it, they're going to hire you. They have responsibility for their work group, right? Their team. So usually what that means is they get to pick their team. No problem. Yeah, you meant hiring manager. So, okay, so that's basically what I think about that. GTA Live says, aren't companies required to post job openings to public for a certain duration and comply with labor laws? Listen, I get people asking me questions that come from like every country in the world and every industry out there. It's hard for me to say this complies with all laws or it doesn't. That's not what I'm here to do. But the answer to your question is no. You know, certainly where I am in Canada and to my knowledge in the US, absolutely not. You know how you have the right to work anywhere you want? No one can dictate to you that you must work there against your will. And if you want to quit a job, no government or nobody can say, no, you must work there. You can't quit, right? No, you have freedom of choice, right? Well, that extends to organizations also. They can hire who they want and they can terminate them when they want, right? Everybody's got their rights, right? They're not required to post anything across the board. Now, there are some exceptions for things like government, right? Where government gives that organization money. And in return, it says, okay, well, in exchange for this money we're giving you, we have some requirements that you need to abide by. Number one is all jobs that you post have to be posted publicly. So, and then all salaries and things have to be disclosed. And all. So there's some exception for things like government. But the vast majority of jobs are not in government, okay? Now, I come from the private sector, okay? I'm not a government type person. I come from the private sector. And, you know, that the hidden job market is a huge thing. You know, people want someone that they trust, someone who's tried and true, someone that they know, someone that's been around their industry for a long time, so they know they're legit. They do not want a stranger because for the jobs that, you know, it's an important job. You're being trusted with responsibility for something important. Like think of an executive, you're a vice president, they might put an entire division of a company. That's several business units that all make money. They put that in your care. And you, if you're the wrong person for the job, you could flush all of that down the toilet very quickly. You know, there might be a couple thousand people working in those divisions. You could get them all unemployed in a very short amount of time if you don't know what you're doing and you have no real care of, you're not taking your job seriously, right? You know, you could just say a couple of statements publicly and alienate a lot of your suppliers, your institutional customers. Like, it's very important you get the right person in that. You do not want to take a chance on a stranger, right? So consequently, a lot of jobs that are important, you have responsibility for a lot of people, a lot of assets, a lot of, you know, revenue generating business units and things like that. You need someone that you can't just hire a stranger and take a chance. They could do a lot of damage, right? So for those jobs, they need someone that they know is good. And that means that they've been around for a long time. They're the equivalent of an internal employee that isn't internal. They've been around the industry. Okay. And the problem with, like, when you post a job is that when people show up, you never really know what their motivations are. Everybody says they're enthusiastic about the role. Most people aren't. They just want the money. They don't really care about the company. They don't care about the boss. They don't care about the role. They just want the money, right? So by default, you can't really trust any of those candidates simply because of the circumstances, right? Their motivation is they want money. That's why they're there. Now, if there wasn't a promise of a job, would those people be there? That's the first question. Most of them won't. Some of them will, right? That's why things like informational interviews are really important, because you're not going down there to get a job. There's no job. There's no money. It's like volunteering. You're there to do that thing, and you take money out of the equation, right? There might be other self-serving motives, but it's not money. You know, maybe it's like prestige or access to something, or getting a referral or a recommendation or a reference or something like that. You know what I mean? So it's no coincidence that a lot of important jobs, they're not posted publicly, because you can almost discount all those candidates. We don't know. I mean, are these people, first of all, we don't know who they are. Secondly, what's their motivation? Are they actually suited to this, or are they just here for the cash? In which case, we can't hire those people. We need someone that we know is going to be good. It's like you going on vacation and giving the keys to your house or something to someone who you've hired to take care of your house in your absence, right? That means they're going to have access to all your stuff. They could, like, access to all your valuables. They could do untold damage. Your house could burn down. You could come home from vacation and find your house deserted. All your stuff has been cleaned out. They could steal your identity, your personal information, do all kinds of nefarious things with it. You know what I mean? Like, who do they give those roles to? Do they give them to strangers? They post a job and say, I don't know you, but you seem fine. Here's the keys to my house. No, they don't. They usually get family members, right? Now, your family might be incompetent and they might be annoying, but they're probably not going to steal all your stuff and commit identity theft, right? Most families, right? So that's the motivation behind it, right? When it comes to trust, you can't hire a stranger because it's a total crapshoot, you know? And if it's something very important, you can't afford to take a chance. That's why the hidden job market exists, right? Now, this is actually not this horrible thing that it sounds like, because you can get the jobs. The obvious way is direct outreach. If you reach out to an organization when there's no job posted, what are your motivations for doing that? Are you there just for the money? No, it's a little more complicated. You know, you might be there because you're genuinely enthusiastic about doing that kind of work. You know, if you talk to somebody and instead of asking for a job, as in a job interview, you do an informational interview. There's no job. You're there to learn. Who does those types of interview? It's people that want to learn. There's no job. There's no money involved, right? Consequently, not as many people do those, right? But if someone does it, you know that they're doing it because they genuinely want to learn this stuff, right? So you see, you can expose different motivations and stuff by doing different things. So that's why this stuff is like really non-standard. It's not posted and everyone waits in line. It's more of a homespun kind of thing. You have to go out and create the opportunities. The opportunities are there for everyone, but only a very few amount of people are actually taking advantage of them. Anyway, if you want to know more about this, it's such a huge topic. I can't get into it, and go through it all. It would take like hours and hours. That's why I put it into a course. There's that course there. If you want to learn this stuff, a big part of that course is getting hired through networking. Like for introverts who don't know anyone, this is also good for people they arrive in a country or they arrive in a new city. They know absolutely nobody, but they can do things like direct outreach and surface all kinds of job opportunities that are not posted. So check out that course if you want to go more. I do have some free videos on my YouTube channel that I did a long time ago. But once again, it's like there's a limit to what you can go into in like a 5-minute video. There's a lot to some of these principles. So I put all that stuff there where you can have like it's like a course with templates and all this kind of stuff. So if you're interested in that, check out that course. There's a link in the description. And that's all I'm going to say about that. Rafid says, on a different note, I would like to thank you for your videos. Well, thank you very much. You're absolutely welcome, Rafid. I got this interview because I talked directly to the head of the DS department, so data science department. She reached out to me saying they have this opening. Well, great. That's good. You see, you're starting to surface. There's an example of like a job in the hidden job market that wasn't posted that you are exposing by doing this. It's about people talking to other people. And if you know what to say, it's not awkward, it's not inappropriate, it's perfectly natural and normal. This is stuff I learned in my late 20s, starting in my late 20s, about how you create all these opportunities. And it's also the default way that people in mid-management and up get hired. Rafid says, plus me and my wife, technically that should be my wife and I, we both got benefited by watching your interview question videos. So thank you very much. It's great to hear, Rafid. I'm glad it's useful. And thank you for being so gracious and coming back and telling me this. It's a good feeling. I'm glad it's helpful. Ghost says, turning down a job offer can get someone blackballed. It can. Does it? Usually, no. But I mean, it takes all kinds to make a world. You get all kinds of weirdness happening. So that's the thing about job search. It's like everything happens some of the time, right? But usually, no. That if you turn down a job that someone offers you, that doesn't necessarily mean that. It won't mean that in most cases, but it can. Like I know, for example, something that's more of a general rule is if you're in management, you're a mid-manager or up, and especially in like large organizations, and I've seen this a couple of times, a couple of large organizations I work with, or I've worked in, they will offer you a job and say like, you're at this level. Well, a job is opened up at this level, like one notch up, right? But you have to relocate for it, and it's in a different division or a different department. Okay, so we want to move you here. So that means you relocate, right? Now, a common thing is for people to be conflicted because, you might not want to relocate. You might have a family, you might have kids, they're in school, it's a normal thing, right? And you can turn it down. But in different organizations, they will regard that in different ways. In some organizations, and this is not typical, but it does happen, they'll say, if we have said that, we're willing to move you up, but you turn us down, that's it. We're not going to go to you again. If you turn this down, the consequences are that we will not offer you a position up here again, right? So you better take this if you want to move up. That's the way this works. Sometimes you can refuse once, but not twice. Like you can refuse twice, but then they'll never offer to promote you ever again. At least the existing individuals, as I crack my monitor with my elbow, the existing individuals will not do that, right? So it depends. Different organizations, they have different cultures, and it works different ways. But that stuff is known. Others, there's no restrictions. They've got a lot of people that don't have an issue with that, right? It depends on the culture of the company. So if you want to know ghosts, does this company regard it this way? Go talk to people at that company, right? What I found is that, if you have an informational interview with people like executives and stuff, what I found for like a lot of questions that are more sensitive, maybe like of this nature, for the first hour, they won't say anything. But after an hour, if you're still talking to them, then they start to open up about things like, it's a little touchier like this, Con Tuna, is that Con or Kane Tuna, says, hello, I love your channel, Con. Well, thank you. It's very nice of you, Kane Tuna. I love your name. It's so amazing. I have no idea how to pronounce it. I believe that if you can't pronounce somebody's name, you're free to make up whatever pronunciation you want. Obviously, that's not true because there are consequences to that, but I'm often found myself in a situation where I don't know how to pronounce someone's name, but I kind of have to say it. So I always immediately put disclaimers on, because I probably bastardized their name. And a lot of people get insulted by that. So no offense intended. Thank you for the comment there. Very nice thing. Raffin says, my wife and I. That's better. Yeah. When I insist upon you speak the King's English to me, if we're going to talk. I'm just kidding, of course. That's all good. Raffin says, hypothetical question. Can you give me an example of how can I leverage my customer service experience or any irrelevant experience into the data science role? Okay. This is just totally off the top of my head. Customer service, you're dealing with individuals, you're dealing with data points. And as we all know, the way individuals react to various stimuli, whether it's a situation they've been in or a conversation they're having with you, can vary widely. Some people have lightning quick tempers and they take everything a bad way. Other people are ignorant and they're not aware of things that maybe other people are. Other people have strange ideas that are kind of non-standard. So in customer service, you're encountering this all the time, right? And the variation in responses is something that we deal with quite a lot, right? It is the stuff of statistical analysis. When we want to see how effective we are in keeping our customers happy and stuff like that, this variation is like the core of what we deal with, right? So in data science, you're dealing, I imagine, with a lot of variation, right? You're dealing with exceptions and you're dealing with probabilities and things like this, Well, we've been on the front line of that type of thing for a very long time. We see, more than the abstraction at a high level, we see like the individual, data points and what leads to their kind of variations and, behavior, so it's all related. What I see customer service as is it's like a ground level application of data science that feeds the data that allows data science to derive intelligence from what we're doing, and it's like a sort of a mutually beneficial arrangement where we then incorporate the results of the statistical analysis of what we're doing to help us be more effective at dealing with the individual data points, right? I don't know. I'm just making this crap off the top of my head, but something like that I could see. There is some relation between them. Al Gall says, are there blacklists of candidates who failed interviews and were marked as unhireable? Do recruiters have access to any services and database for filtering such candidates? Okay, like here's kind of how that works is that officially, at least in every country that I'm aware of, there's no central registry of sharing undesirable aspects of employees, right? There's no central database that recruiters can look up to see if, what your past bosses have said about you or anything like that, okay? So there's no central thing like that. Now, I also believe, if I'm not mistaken, that in a lot of countries, they do have labor laws and employment standards that discourage that type of thing when it's done like informally. Okay, so they'll have human rights laws, they'll have anti-discrimination laws of some kind, things like that. That one of the things is that they put a lot of constraints on what companies can do. Okay. However, it has been known that on an informal basis, on an industry-specific basis, sometimes companies collude together to share this type of information. Okay? So that has been known in, as I understand it, in isolated cases. Like, probably the most prominent example of this that I'm aware of was back when Steve Jobs was running Apple, right? And, you can think what you want about Steve Jobs. I don't think very favorably of Steve Jobs, but like one of the things that he did was, like, if you were an Apple employee and you were a prominent Apple employee especially, and you left, he would do everything in his power to prevent you from getting rehired somewhere else. He would communicate to other companies in the tech industry in the United States and say things like, okay, if I find that this employee has been hired by you, then there will be consequences. We will terminate contracts with you, blah, 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 things like this. So like we're going to apply industry pressure. And because Apple was so big that, they actually had some clout and their threats were taken seriously. So that type of thing has been known. But it's far from typical. It's a wild exception. Generally speaking, if you turn down a job, there's absolutely no consequence. People turn down jobs all the time. Like it's a common thing. A lot of candidates, they'll have more than one job offer. You will be turning down at least one, because you can't work two places at once, right? So it's a rather common thing. And for the vast majority of people, there's never any consequences for that, The other thing is that internally, who they offer jobs to is usually, generally speaking, it's kept confidential internally. So the HR department would be able to access that, and the hiring manager will be able to access that. But beyond that, it won't be freely available. People will not be able to look up and say, oh, I see you replaced my boss. I'm going to look up on the company hard drive who else you offered the job to. I want to see all the resumes of all the people that you considered and what offers you gave them. It's like, you can't do that, right? That's all kept very confidential. And if the hiring manager leaves, or, HR kind of a few years go by and they have turnover, right? A lot of that stuff, it almost gets lost. Like the data exists, but, people aren't like doing research projects to go back in the past and see who did what. You know what I mean? Like that's how these things work. So it really isn't an issue you need to worry about. Okay, unless you know something very specific about, your specific industry in your region, they are doing this specific thing, unless you know that for fact, I wouldn't fear this or worry about it because it's a wild exception as far as I know. Okay, so don't fear blacklists unless you know something for a fact. Amaze says, having been actively interviewing during an employment gap, how can I tell a recruiter that I got rejected a job offer due to fit? Goal is to hint that I'm actually marketable. Yeah, you are marketable, Amaze. You're an awesome person. Like, okay, so what you're saying is that you're doing a job search and you applied for a job and you didn't get it. Like, excuse my language, but it sounds a little bit like you're hand-wringing over that. That happens all the time. Right? Just because you got turned down for a job offer. And the whole like fit thing, just so you know, when they say you're not a fit, that is, I believe it's like the biggest kiss off answer they can give. They're not saying what that really means. That could mean almost anything. I'm sorry, I didn't like the color of your shoes, so you're not a good fit. Oh, you lost your temper and threatened to beat me up in the job interview, even though I'm the hiring manager. I'm sorry, you're not a good fit. I can see that right now as your fist smashes into my face. You know what I mean? Like, fit can mean anything. It's a kiss-off answer usually because it's so general, it says nothing, right? You know, so don't worry about that. I mean, people get rejected all the time. Highly qualified, talented, amazing people get rejected all the time. A lot of time it's from idiots who don't recognize talent when it's staring them straight in the face. A lot of other times it's just, you know, you're awesome, but these people just don't happen to be looking for that thing right now. You know what I mean? They agree. You are awesome. You know, you're great at, like, you know, doing this. Unfortunately, we're looking for someone to wash the car, you know, and sorry. I mean, we'd like to employ you if we could, but right now we're just looking for someone who can wash our cars. That's all. So, you know. Okay, so don't worry about it, amazed. Okay, you're awesome. Don't worry about this stuff. Just go ahead. You're awesome. Remember that. Illustrate that to people. And sometime soon, people will agree with you and they will hire you. I have to get rolling very soon. I've got a live stream like starting at 2, like that's in 10 minutes. So I'm going to end this live stream. I'm going to come back. I'll see if I can just very quickly go through these 2 questions. Kane Tuna says, I'm a fresh graduate and I'll be working for a tech company for 1 year, and my manager always praises me during our one-on-one meetings. She never gives me a negative feedback. Should I get worried? No. I mean, isn't that a good thing? Like what, you would prefer that she tells you you're not working out and that, you know, there's going to be some serious changes coming soon? Would you prefer that? Seems like it's a good thing, Kane Tuna. I wouldn't be worried. If you have any doubts, go and talk to your manager and say, so how am I doing? And is there anything that you would prefer that I do differently? You know, that like, you initiate that. Go to them, you know, immediately after lunch on a Friday or something, you know, when they're not stressed out, they're not busy, and just, you know, hey, you got a moment, you know, how am I doing? You know, is there something you'd prefer that I do differently than what I'm doing? Just looking for feedback, you know, and then, you know, that'll help. Okay. Green Virus says, is it common that at the end of the interview with C-suite execs, they decide to change what they're looking for? Happening to me on Monday and it feels bad. Green Virus, you have no control over these people. One option is that they're just not into you for whatever reason. Not that you're bad, it's just that they're looking for something else. And so a convenient diplomatic way of trying to express that to you is they say, oh, we're actually decided we're looking for something else, right? It could be a total kiss-off. Or these people actually could be that incompetent. It's hard to tell. You will never be able to tell. You know what? The problem is theirs, okay? You know, it's a matter of luck. That's what it is. That's how this stuff always works out for everyone. People like Albert Einstein have been turned down. You know, some of the most amazing people in history have been turned down, right? The rock band, the Beatles, the #1 selling artist of all time, even today, they were told, I'm sorry, we're not going to sign you to our record label because guitar music is on its way out. You know what I mean? Like, some people have been incredibly, you know, staggeringly wrong, whose job it is to spot talent. You know what I mean? And they turned down the Beatles. You know what I mean? Don't worry about it, okay? Forget about it. You will never know what's going on in their minds. Maybe it's like a little, you know, hamster running a treadmill in their minds. You have no idea. It wouldn't be the first time. So just remember, you've got certain skills, you've got certain talents, you're great to deal with. Focus on generating new opportunities for yourself, and it's a matter of random chance whether those work out. It's a roll of the dice. The more rolls of the dice, the more likelihood you will get hired. Listen, guys, I got to take off, okay? I've got to leave like now, and I'll be back in a few minutes. But stay on the line, stay on my channel, and we can continue this if you wish. Thank you to everybody who participated. Check out my courses. Check out the Get Hired course, if that's what you're wanting to do. If you're wanting to climb the ladder, check out that thing. And if you're wanting to learn how to make money, check out that. I will be back in a few minutes. Take care of yourselves.